point is Financial Phil McCoy from Ameriprise Financial and the Mirius Group of Financial Advisors on Winchester Avenue, Martinsburg. Good morning, Philly.
Good morning, guys. How are you all?
We are well, sir, and sounds like you're in commute to work.
I am. I'm almost in the parking lot, so I'm almost there.
Well, that's good to have you at work, showing up bright and early.
The backseat of the limo, the driver up front.
Some Grey Poupon.
The driver's up front, that's for sure. The driver's up front.
How was your Easter dinner, Phil?
It was good. My wife's family probably celebrates Easter more heavily than Christmas. So we had a really, really busy day yesterday. But everything went well. The weather was great, and everybody got along well, and Easter baskets and Easter egg hunts and all that fun stuff. So it all went great.
How was your Easter dinner, John?
What he said, the other way.
Gee, what happened?
Yeah. Well, let's come back to John's in a second. But we went to the Waltons for Easter yesterday, and what a delightful day we had with Michael and Susan. Wonderful meal. It's the way Easter should be.
Good people, the Waltons, yeah. Did you want to tell a little story there, John?
Well, the food was wonderful. Went to my brother's house, and a lot of little kids and dogs. It was wonderful till the very end. And
what happened at the end?
Well, some politics got into the mix. And
were you involved? You were a participant, John?
Yes.
He was at the center of it. He was Henry Fonda in Failsafe on the phone.
I was a passive participant answering questions from one of my relatives, and then another relative came in and was offended by the answer that I was giving to the first relative, and then I was essentially thrown out of the house.
It doesn't sound very passive to me, Rob.
It sounds like a Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, doesn't it?
Here's your hat, what's your hurry, get out of my house.
You get invited over for dinner, get into a discussion, and then get thrown out. Yeah. That's almost every Curb Your Enthusiasm episode.
And poor Joy, she has been drug out of the house. Said, John, what did you do? What did you do?
She knew exactly what I had done. It's the same scenario. But honestly, I went.
Don't talk politics at dinner, John.
And I don't. This is the thing. I would never start this. But it started as a one-on-one conversation out on the deck between my niece and I, and then others joined, and then they didn't like what they overheard. So
I think you should answer these questions. Well, I refuse to answer under the grounds that it may incriminate me.
And getting kicked out of your house.
And then shove a potato in your mouth and chew slowly. So that's the best way to handle those things.
So it was a heavenly.
Yeah, and then the Pope died. Hey, you see that? You put a bad vibe in the air, man. So, Phil, I'm reading this headline here. It says U.S. dollar falls to 3-year low as Trump's Powell threats further dent investor confidence. The NASDAQ futures are down 1.4%, S&P futures 1.08%, Dow futures down 0.9 of a percentage point. Phil, how much really is related to Trump and his statements about the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell?
I don't know. I think it could bring right now everything's uncertain. And, one big question is, have we reached peak uncertainty with the tariff chart from just a few weeks ago, and have we kind of been desensitized a little? I know it's a very sensitive topic right now, the tariffs, but have we been desensitized a little bit? So that question's out there, and then you throw in who I have, and I still think is probably the first or second most important person to our markets, Jerome Powell, and this kind of tip that they've got going back and forth. And, well, I don't know if it's going back and forth. I think it's mainly Trump and him, but the threat that he wouldn't be there any longer. And not that the stock market has been a huge friend of Jerome Powell or has liked him that much, but there's some certainty there, and we kind of know his actions and when he speaks, and we know what it means, and they're very predictable with what they're going to do, and they have been for quite some time, which is one of the reasons why I've been such a fan of his over the years, is it's been very predictable. So that could just be another a level of uncertainty that could come up if he were to either get pressured into doing something that he doesn't want to do. I don't think he would do that, but there's a lot of people that think that he will, that he'll cave to the pressure and start to decrease rates in the face of potential rising inflation. And or does he lose his job altogether and then get replaced with someone that is more likely to cut rates? And so our markets are it's like, my goodness, how much more uncertainty can we handle? And over the weekend, I do think that's a lot of it. Over the weekend, the concerns that he may lose his position has added to the uncertainty. But Thursday at the close, and I was hoping that it would have, and unfortunate for Netflix that they had great results, but there was no market open the next day because of Good Friday. So we got to set on that for 3 days. And as the news cycle goes past, we kind of forgot about that great earnings report coming from Netflix. But have no fear, we have a lot of earnings coming up this week, and maybe that could calm our markets down a little bit, calm that volatility down somewhat anyway, as we start to look for what companies can be tariff champions, if you will, or not as impacted as much by tariffs as what others would be.
Netflix is up 2% today at $992.51. That's just about a $20 gain. Bill has been bringing his tin cup to work lately, Phil, because Tesla stock is having some trouble. It's down another 4% today at 231 and a half. And I saw Bill out there on Edward Miller Boulevard with the cup the one day.
Yeah, you drove right by. You did not even slow up.
I waved to you.
No, you looked the other way.
He hit the puddle just right.
Yeah.
Come on, give me a word of encouragement now, Phil.
What can you tell? What can you tell old Bill here?
Buying opportunity.
Well, if you want to be encouraged with Tesla, you want to look back about a year. So, of course, going in so far this year, it hadn't been so good. But the longer-term picture for Tesla looks all right. So it depends. In the stock market, especially right now, especially with all the emotion, uncertainty, and the volatility that we're dealing with, you can make stats. I used to say this about football all the time. We used to do it with Ben Roethlisberger talking on. You can make stats say anything that you want to. So I can show you one chart that says, man, Tesla is a dog. It has been doing terrible. But I could turn right around and show you another time frame that says the exact opposite, that it's doing pretty good. So where is it right now in that cycle, and what can turn it around other than earnings and forward-looking guidance that I think is on tap for? I think Tesla's on tap for this week.
It is. Yes, it is.
We'll get, so that could be a big day for them. The robo-taxi and all the stuff that we talked about last year that could be a big boost for Tesla. Maybe we get some direction on that, and it could lift that stock up a little bit. But surprisingly enough, Elon Musk has been out of the news a little bit of late compared to what he was just a month or so ago.
Are there any charts that show how much the passion for EVs was tied to the rebates, $7,500 rebates that people got?
I'm sure that there are. I don't know how valid they are, because when there was some if you really dug into those rebates, I think that there was an income limit that started to phase that out, and the main income of the Tesla purchasers exceeded that limit. So I did read something. I don't want to give it credit or take away from it, but I did see that most of the people that bought those EVs that were eligible for the credit, they actually didn't get the credit because their incomes were too high. So how much did that actually drive growth for Tesla? I'm not quite sure. I think it's actually a small part of it overall that drove the sales for Tesla. Maybe it brought people to the table to look at it and then found out, like, well, I really like this car. I'm getting it anyway, but I'm not going to be eligible for that rebate.
Let's talk about dollar manipulation, Phil, and it doesn't have to be specifically about the dollar, anybody's currency around the country, because we've heard in the years past that China has manipulated their currency on many occasions, and they're being kind of quietly accused of doing it again. So talk to me about currency manipulation and its actual effects and what the goal of currency manipulation is.
Well, on one hand, you think of, and it does get really confusing when you look at the U.S. dollar. But on one hand, it's like a balancing act, almost like with interest rates. But when you hear a strong U.S. dollar, typically, what it says to us, well, that's a good thing. It's strong. Strong means good, and it's a good thing. But essentially what that means is our products look too expensive for other people, and it could hurt exports. A weak U.S. dollar makes our products look strong or look inexpensive and attractive to outside purchasers. So there's a balancing act that we want to achieve, almost like if you think with the price of oil, there's a balancing act with the price of oil where the price of oil makes the companies happy and it makes the consumers happy. It's the same thing with the strength of the dollar. Right now it's becoming a little bit weak, and that brings about fear and some of this rush we've seen into gold. We're getting a lot of questions about gold and a lot of questions about not so much about Bitcoin, but it does kind of fall into that alternative category. But right now, the weak dollar opposed to other countries' currencies is becoming a concern from the standpoint that there's some that fear that we wouldn't be the main reserve currency any longer. And I think that's pretty premature to start being worried about that. But there is a balancing act between a weak dollar and a strong dollar and where we want it to be. We don't want it to be too strong, and we also don't want it to be too weak. Right now, it's looking pretty weak.
America in the Morning had a story on their financial report, and they quote a lot of CNBC people, but I'm not sure if this was one of those people or not, who said that around the world, investors are dumping stocks, American stocks specifically, at an unprecedented level. I'm not sure how much you can see into any of the international funds that you folks offer up to your investors or not as to specific stocks and such, and who holds what. But have you seen any evidence of that to be accurate?
Well, we've seen evidence of American company stocks getting sold abroad and at home, and that's part of the reason for this most recent drops. And then you go back into the economic data and what some of our uncertainty and fears would be with tariffs. So you've got the economic impact of tariffs, which are debated hotly every day between many, like what would they do to our country and to American companies, and what would they do to the consumer. We have those same questions outside of the United States, where other investors, like we would buy into, like you had just said, an international mutual fund per se that's inside of your 401k, or what you're doing in a lot of cases, in most cases, you're investing in companies that in some cases you've never even heard of because they're international companies. Well, employees and investors in other countries are doing the same thing with our companies. We're just a little bit more attractive typically than what their own would be. So we have more people buying into our companies. But there is some sell-off because of fear or uncertainty of what the tariffs will do to inflation, what they will do to companies, what they will do to American consumers here spending money on these American companies. So there's a lot of concern with that. But there's also an emotional standpoint to it as well, where a lot think that people are selling off in opposition because they don't like what our administration is doing. So therefore, they're going to sell American companies, much like what we would do with China right now. I think everybody, a lot of consumers in the U.S., if you had a choice to purchase something made in America or made in China, you would have a stronger desire to buy that made in America. I don't care what side of the party you're on. You would have a stronger desire to buy that made in America ticket, made probably more so than what you would have before, just because of this anxiety that we have with that country. So there's a political part that plays into it as well, where they're walking with their pocketbooks, selling American companies or American funds, if you will, not the company American funds, but just because they're opposed to what our administration's doing.
Yeah, along that extension of that is India. India is one of the emerging economic powers in the world, and has been a fairly significant trading partner for several years. There's evidence that India is drifting more and more toward China. Is that affecting the market at all?
No, it will from a standpoint of our exports. And, on top of the tariffs, and I think India is doing it because of their anxiety with our administration, so they're opposing these tariffs and taking a look at what they can get done at China. But you bring up a really good point with India. India kind of mirrors what China looked like in the late 1990s. I saw a report, and this was a while ago, so I don't know if this still stands true, but India had the second or third highest population in the world, the youngest population, and the most educated population, and had the most room to grow as far as their markets were concerned. So they are certainly important to us, and a relationship with India would be extremely important to us. If we wanted to replace China as that main trading partner, India would be the first country I think we would run to accomplish that, whether it's exports or imports. India is very, very important.
And yet it appears they may be drifting more toward China recently because of some of the policies we have, as opposed to staying closely allied with us. So.
Yes, and some of the uncertainty. So hopefully these negotiations go by way of a good economic outcome especially in the near term. But the ones with India, I'm glad you brought that up. So China takes the headlines almost always, but I struggle and I search to find stuff with what our relationship is like with India, because they would be a good replacement for China.
I struggle to understand, and maybe this is for everybody who's here. Powell and Trump are obviously at loggerheads with each other. Trump has a strategy. I don't pretend to understand the strategy, but he has a strategy of where he wants to go, and Powell is a roadblock for it. Trump has a selection. He wants to replace him with Kevin Warsh, whoever he is. And I don't understand the strategy of Powell steadfastly staying in for one more year. He's going to be gone in a year. Where is the harm strategically? And I know you don't like to get into politics, but just in general, is the Fed chair supposed to be a roadblock for presidential policies, or is he supposed to be an implementer of presidential policies?
Neither. He's supposed to be completely and utterly unmoved by the president and what they want to happen as far as interest rates are concerned. So the only concern the Federal Reserve is supposed to have, the only two concerns, is the labor market and inflation. And then there's a balancing act between the two. So when you look at now they look at a lot of economic reports because it bleeds into what's the labor going to look like and what will future inflation look like. So think back to the days of good news is bad news and bad news is good news. And I don't even know what good news means right now or bad news means right now. It's everything's in flux. But the Federal Reserve is supposed to look at those and those alone and say this is what what our policy is going to be in order to keep a stable, low inflation rate or get it back down to where we want and still maintain a healthy labor market. Which of those two will they pick in a battle? So then that's where this stagflation the concern comes into play, because right now stagflation, every time it's one of the most searched words on Google right now, would mean rising inflation and a falling labor market, and that kind of puts the handcuffs on the Federal Reserve, or it puts them between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand they could increase interest rates to bring inflation down like they did a couple of years ago, but by increasing interest rates, it's going to injure the labor market even more. On the flip side, they could decrease interest rates, which is an inflationary pressure. That's why Jerome Powell had said last week, and it did hurt our markets. That's why he had said last week, I don't see us decreasing rates right now. We're going to hold steady because we don't know the inflation, what the tariffs will do to this inflation. I think it will increase inflation, but we don't know what the tariffs are going to be, so it's hard to predict what it's going to do inflation. So therefore, we can't drop interest rates, even though we've seen recently anyway, and it's still in a vacuum. Be clear, in a vacuum, our unemployment numbers look just fine. In a vacuum, there's nothing wrong with them. But they are starting to soften a little bit, and they have for quite some time, not just in 2025, but they have been softening for some time. So which do you repair first? Which is worse? Which one do you give the attention to first? And that's where the pressure from the executive office kind of comes into it kind of clouds the picture a little bit, where then he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. If he does decrease rates to say, hey, we need to help the employment market out, they're going to be accused of pandering to the president. If they don't, they're going to get more pressure from the executive office. It really puts them in a bad situation. And then explaining this myself to my daughter, not at a dinner, but to my daughter, I did. It's almost as if it's that kid on the that kid on the team that is screaming he's not getting enough playing time, when the coach was just getting ready to play that kid, and now he doesn't want to play that kid because it looks like he's playing him simply because the kid was causing a ruckus, or he was malcontent because he wasn't playing before. And the coach is like, man, I was getting ready to insert him into the lineup, her or him into the lineup, but I can't now because I don't want the appearance that kid's malcontent is the reason why I played him. He just backed himself back up on the bench, and I don't know if that will happen with the Federal Reserve or not. Do they hold steady with interest rates despite what just because of what the pressure the president is putting on them?
I wonder what percentage of Americans would have passed that quiz from the question John asked about the Federal Reserve chairman. I'll bet most people don't know he's independent.
No, they don't. No, they don't. And most people didn't know in the last term that he was appointed by Donald Trump. So he was appointed by Donald Trump and got very little pushback from Biden. So he's supposed to be completely independent of Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah, and I think there's 12 to 15 of these independent agencies that have been around for quite a while. But it was under Hubert Humphrey when he was vice president they became legitimacy. But Trump would like to get rid of all of them. Get rid of each one of the independent.
You're talking about the board of governors of the Federal Reserve, or independent agencies in general?
Independent agencies in general.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
Of which the Federal Reserve is one.
Well, the Fed has such an enormous political impact. You know, what they do has such an impact on the economy, and that reflects. Nobody blames the Fed.
But
right,
but the others do as well. FAA, for example.
Oh my gosh, Rob blamed the Fed for quite.
So I can see that. I can see how the political leadership would want to have control, certainly over what the Fed chair is doing, because the Fed chair would reflect what the presidential administration, what their strategy is, and it is not an elected position. So yeah, I am surprised.
Well, yeah. The argument has been made that it's that these agencies are all part of the executive branch. Therefore, at least Trump's making this argument that since they're part of the executive branch, even they're independent, he should have the right of either eliminating or firing or hiring. So,
yeah, economists, and I will in this particular case, you are correct, Phil. And Trump and I did agree on Powell's handling of inflation. We both agreed that he waited way too long to make a move. He misdiagnosed what it was as transitory early on. So we were in agreement there. I am not in agreement that the Federal Reserve chairman should listen to what the president says he wants done on economic policy. The president is not an economics professor. He is the president of the United States, and the Fed chairman is there for a particular reason, along with his board of governors. In this particular case, it's a his. And they're the ones that make the economic policy. We can, they're the ones that take the interest rates, making a move on that. And that's the way it should be, because every president that comes in, you can't have the manipulation of interest rates based on you needing to get reelected. And that's what that would be used for. Every time you get up against a midterm, well, we need these interest rates to be lowered. And we need same with the general election.
Last year as well, where he was kind of in a bad spot during running up to the election, because if he is to decrease rates, then it's going to be perceived that he's trying to help one party. If he doesn't decrease rates, it's going to be perceived that he's trying to help.
To me, that's what it looks like now. If he had 3 or 4 years left in his term, then I would argue differently. But now he's going to be gone in a year, and he's running out the clock to put this into the midterms, which feels, especially given the activities during the Biden administration where he misdiagnosed everything, it feels like a political move to me, that the roadblock that he is to the president's administration.
I'm not sure the results would indicate he misdiagnosed everything.
I am going to take us out with some Curb Your Enthusiasm music. Phil, how do we reach you for more information today?
You can reach us at 304-263-4343 or stop by and sit with an appointment at 1270 Winchester Avenue, right here, Martin.
Thank you, Philly. I'll be back.
Have a great day, guys.
You too. Back with Bill Stubblefield and John Larry David Gilstrap.